Right. Okay. Welcome, everybody, this Friday afternoon. Thank you for making time to come. I'm really excited about this session. I'm Steve. I'm one of the people from Multitrack. I was with the fellows all this morning talking about sound design and listening to lots of stuff and hearing some fantastic questions. So thank you all fellows for coming back, and welcome everyone else who's joined us as well this afternoon. Um, I'm not going to say very much other than hand over in just a sec to Matt and to James, who have kindly given up a bit of their afternoon to talk about station sound and so much more as well. This is one of our masterclass listening sessions. The whole series is a chance to get a real intimate insight and a behind the scenes look at an audio producer's creative process. We've had some fabulous sessions so far in the past. Some of those I think you'll be able to catch up with later on if you missed any. But without any more faffing about, I shall hand over, I think, first to James.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
great, Steve. Thank
on
you.
you go. Thank you so much.
Almost like we ran through it. And so,
Okay.
hey everyone, I know that a lot of you, especially the fellows, have had quite the busy Friday already. So we're going to hopefully run you into the weekend with a little insight to our crazy niche in the audio industry of like the audio branding and station sound world, and yeah, hopefully like lots of audio examples to follow, some like jargon busting we'll do, and then we'll also properly go into like a session of how we make some audio as well. So I thought we would start with just a little bit about who we are. And so I am James Kenny. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Wisebuddah. And Wisebuddah is one of the industry leaders in terms of uh, like main station sound packages, jingles, and a thing called audio imaging, which is all those little bits on the radio that aren't the music or the presenters talking, but you would notice if they weren't there. And so I've been at Wisebuddah for nearly 10 years. So I have grown up as radio shifted. So from where I started at Wisebuddah to where it is now, our audio sounds crazily different in some areas, and then some stations have almost kept the same sound over the years, and we've evolved our production techniques. But what I do is I'm sort of responsible for the day-to-day management of Wisebuddah, and it's sort of that production process. And I've probably in my time overseen the rebrand of hundreds of radio stations. And so I will hand over a little bit to Matt just to introduce himself as well.
Thanks, James. I'm Matt. I'm a producer at Wisebuddah. I'm 24 as of last week, and I've been here for about 2 years. I've worked in radio for the best part of about 7 years, station sound for six. So I started at sort of school doing sort of music technology and that kind of thing, messing around on a DAW, and then started reading travel on a station called Time 1075 in Romford, which I don't know if anyone knows that, but I wasn't the best at reading travel, let's put it that way. So I decided to stick to the off-air stuff, and I started making a few promos for a few of our shows that we had on. And that's when I discovered station sound and this weird niche of the industry that we call audio branding, imaging, jingles. Started posting some of my work on SoundCloud, and it got picked up by the BBC, where I spent 3 years imaging for Radio 1, Radio 2, Asian Network, and Six Music. And now I'm here at Wisebuddah, having just done 2 years imaging some of the biggest stations in the world, like Radio 1, Radio 2, Hits Radio. So largely a lot of the same stuff, but it's still a privilege to work with such a big variety of stations on a day-to-day. So I essentially image the day-to-day the day-to-day imaging of these stations, which includes all the stuff that you hear in between the songs that's not the song, basically.
Cheers, Matt. So I'll just move this along. So a little bit more on something that we already touched on in terms of what Wisebuddah do. So as we mentioned, that we look after the radio identities for such a broad spectrum of stations, really, from your contemporary hit radio stations, which are your Radio Ones, your Hits Radio, and those ones that are constantly churning the new music and are trying to stay almost ahead of what today's music is with their sound. So they're the ones that feel like they're constantly evolving, keeps you really on your toes, and the sound of those can change pretty much weekly depending on what the playlist is. And we have to adapt to that. So someone like Matt is very much hot on like the new music trends. He's listening to new music all the time, looking for like the new singers and like what that new sound is for tomorrow, really, because if we don't have our fingers on the pulse with it as well, then all of a sudden our sound already becomes dated before it's even got on air. So it's quite you almost have to be a little bit of a clairvoyant as well, looking past the present into finding what that next trend is going to be, and matching it to sort of like contemporary music as well. But then at the other end of the spectrum, we will brand up sort of very classic hit stations that probably haven't changed their playlist for like 30 years, some of them, and have the same songs on rotation, but are still looking for like how to refresh their sound probably every couple of years. So what we tend to do is that we reimagine those classics with new production techniques and sort of like remasters and mix techniques to make something that's classic sound really modern still as well. So that like old doesn't mean cheap. That's essentially what we try and do with those stations that have probably a playlist that doesn't churn as often. And we do everything in between, whether it be a country station, some that are like more cultural, so that are a lot of spoken word, and it could be a lot of like foreign language, like focal point shows. We've branded pretty much everything from all corners of the world, and I thought that would be a good thing to sort of just give you a little flavor of that range with some of the example jingles that we have done probably in the last 12 months as well. So just sit back and relax for, I think it's about 1 minute 45 seconds.
Let's go live. Go, hits.
Wisebuddah. Create with us.
So that's just a little snapshot of that's just in the last 12 months of the range of different musical styles, formats of stations, and also how you can sort of see there's some core similarities as well. So as well as all the differences, there's that idea of sort of like the clarity of message, not having something too cluttered as well, so that the station identity can really push through. But it's essentially as well, and Matt, I'll hand this back to you to elaborate on as well in a minute, is what we try and do, our entire raison d'etre is to try and produce like 10 seconds of pop song magic in everything that we do. We try and make tiny little pop songs in like 10 to 12 seconds. And Matt, have you got anything else you'd like to add to sort of the overview of that?
That's exactly spot on. They are tiny little pop songs, and the one thing that sort of separates our tiny little pop songs from any other tiny little pop song you'll listen to is that we have these moments in our tiny little pop songs and our jingles that essentially make a listener turn up the radio and go, hang on a minute, well, that was cool. And just a moment where someone's not expecting something, just to sit on top of the music. It's why what we do makes such a big difference, because people just don't expect it, and it sets radio apart from all the streaming services, from any other medium. That's what radio does best, and that's what we do here.
Yeah, and we also thought that we would pull out a couple of other examples that are slightly outside of that main radio world, but as an example of sort of those same building blocks of principles going into the idea. I've pulled out a theme tune from the Hit List, which is it's actually a TV show, but it's that leveling of the idea of, so within a TV station you have those obviously more thematic and programmed related branding, and it's that same thing of creating almost like a hook and a build within something. But obviously very, very different from the radio jingle thing, because completely instrumental as well. So just take a listen to this. So you hear from the Hit List theme, there's a little bit more melodic busyness, because it's there to support a visual. So where you hear it in isolation as the music, it's probably more in that jauntier, more traditional jingle sphere, which is something that as well, that if you have the comparison with what you've just listened to from the first thing, is probably a little bit of a step away. I think that's fair to say, isn't it, Matt, that from what we would do for a core radio identity to something that's like a TV theme like this, there's a little bit more scope for, should we say, zhuzh in the melody.
No, definitely, I agree there. Definitely.
And then the third thing that we wanted to show you within this, in terms of the Wisebuddah Armory, is our latest podcast theme that we did for Pop Top 10, which is a music podcast hosted by Rylan and Scott Mills, and a weekly guest, where they go through like thematic music essentially and pick out their top 10s. And Matt, you actually wrote this one, didn't you? So it's that idea as well, that the idea with the podcast is the music's not the star of the show and needs to be adaptable to fit more personality driven programming. So Matt, do you want me to play it, or do you want to talk about it before I play it?
I reckon we should play it first, and then I'll talk about why I did what I did, maybe, and how I've brung across Rylan and Scott's personalities in what I've made. Hopefully people can hear that. If they can't, then I haven't done my job properly.
And you can explain it.
One of my many garbage ex-boyfriends cheated on me with a member of a girl band.
No!
The hot one as well.
Hi guys, it's Scott and Rylan and welcome to Pop Top 10. This is a series where we rank our favourite tunes from various different genres.
So it's incredible music, it's iconic pop moments.
Shakira, we love you, but you're out. Sorry, babe. There it is. Honestly,
Love her though.
this is literally my dream. Is having her on the show
Just
today.
like Shakira's it.
I'm fine. We will be back next week with another brand new Pop Top 10. But from me and Scott and the gorgeous Catherine, it's goodbye for now.
It's so much fun.
Yeah, so Matt, do you want to just explain like the sort of the journey and the thought process in creating a piece of music that you know is almost going to be sort of a hand-holding partner to Scott and Rylan, really?
Yeah, so they came to us with a brief, BBC Sounds, and it was essentially to make a track that sounded a bit like Sabrina Carpenter, because Sabrina Carpenter is massive at the moment, very, very contemporary artist, very sort of contemporary sounding music, and a lot of it's sort of that boom, tss, boom, tss, just sort of pop with a like a nice guitar and a nice sort of thudding bass underneath it to really keep it driving. But then that isn't really Scott and Rylan. So a lot of the sort of higher range instruments and a lot of the sort of like wind chimes that you can hear in there, that is a lot of Scott and Rylan, and a lot of those sort of disco string hits are really, really Scott and Rylan as well. Because if you listen to their Radio 2 stuff, I mean, that's what they play a lot, really, and that kind of reflects their era of music and what they love and their personalities, and it's vibrant. And it's big and it's bold, but it's also quite understated because it's a podcast. It's not radio, as in it's not similar to either of the first two things that you've listened to today. And it's very minimal because it's for podcasting, and essentially for podcasting, the aim is not to take away from the podcast, but to bring something to it. So we're just bringing some accompaniment to the real content. Essentially, the theme music isn't the content. The personalities are the content on a podcast like that. And you've obviously got Scott and Rylan, who are big personalities. So yeah, we needed a track to suit that, that wasn't sounding too radio, that wasn't sounding too commercial, and we found a nice sweet spot there, and that's why we've done what we've done.
Yeah, and I think that's of the three things that we showed you, and that's the big lesson. It's about writing to suit both. Sometimes it's not necessarily to suit the audience, it's to suit what the programming is. A lot of the core station sound identities and sound design around those core branding pieces that we showed you first are about the audience. These stations are sort of extensions of who they want their audience to be and what will connect most with them. And you can probably hear that there's a lot more of those that are big sounds, like lots of big sounds for especially the contemporary ones that are changing. So that first piece is a lot about the audience and what the stations pretty much want to connect with their audience with. The theme is a lot more connected with the program, and trying to create that sort of thought in people's brains that as soon as they're watching that, they're sort of know that it's going to be like that entertainment show. And then we deliberately, that's why I showed you the music just in isolation with just the picture of the thing. You can almost start to feel what the pacing and feel of that show will be, and probably where it sits on the schedule as well. Like if you got a little written thing and you heard the music, you'd be like, yeah, weekend nighttime entertainment program round about tea time, that I think that's quite an easy bridge to get from just hearing that and seeing one photo. So I think that we've done our job there with if you're just hearing the elements there. And then as Matt said, the third one is very much about the personalities of the people presenting, and also we know the type of guests that will be on that show as well, and we feel that that music is enough to not sort of be bigger than the personalities. So that the immediacy of that is it sort of leads into, so why do we do this? Like why do we do it? Because you see in this there. We start to go a little bit more technical. There's so many things, so many jargon words around like audio imaging, and I could like say like compression and EQ terminology left, right, and center. But let's not escape the fundamental things around it. Is that you're trying to create a connection in some way to start with, and you are. In a radio station sense, you are trying to be that audio expression of their entire soul, really, and who they are. And then that little thing there, I think, is applicable to all of the starting points of what we're trying to do. Is like we're trying to create a sense, that sense of, it's not like as in like we're the ears to people's heart, really. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we do it. But it's also that I think for me especially coming into it, I always thought that the word jingle had those connotations of sort of those old school, should we say, cheesy jingles for advertising, and whereas really it's like I think that what we do is we're trying to make it cool. Like we're trying to come in and find our place in the music industry as well, and we want to be a reflection of those of the modern music industry and what we do, and to sort of make jingles cool. Like and hopefully with the stuff that you'll see from Matt, that people comment on what we do as, oh, this is actually really technical and really cool. And I think that what we've done in the last few years certainly takes some steps in that way. But Matt, why do you do it?
I mean, I'm going to seg quite nicely into the next slide, but without giving too much away, essentially it works, and it works really well, and it resonates with people. And what we do, our tiny little songs, all it takes is one tiny little song to brighten up someone's day. And yeah, as cheesy as it sounds, it works. People remember them. And as you'll see in the next slide, very recently on Radio 1, if you're an avid Radio 1 listener, you might know, but essentially someone actually called up Greg James on Radio 1 Breakfast, and they requested to hear one of our tiny little songs. So as part of what we do here at Wisebuddah, we make branded song intros for our clients. And what essentially that is imprinting the station's identity into one of the latest chart hits. So say if there's something really resonant in the charts at the moment, Sabrina Carpenter's massive, so I'll go with that example. Let's say we make Sabrina Carpenter sing Radio 1. Someone actually called Greg James and they requested to hear one of those branded song intros, and then they ended up playing about, what is it, like 10 back to back. So it was absolutely crazy. There's a Radio Today article about it, and it's a privilege to be recognized, but honestly we had no idea. I mean, we knew these things worked, but we didn't know the full extent to how they worked. And essentially, yeah, it just people sing along, and people actually have a favorite branded song intro every week, which is crazy to me. But people have started tweeting me about them. People ask to hear them all the time. So I mean, they work, and like in terms of recall, in terms of imprinting a brand or a personality into a track, it's exactly that, what we do essentially. It's been a privilege to work on this one, but yeah, you'll see with the audio what's essentially happened, because it's a bit crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll play it in a minute, Matt. And it's that thing of sort of Radio 1 came to us, didn't they, and said that they wanted something different where they could put brand currency into one small little piece that could be used really flexibly across all of the station output, whether that be sort of the on air, digital, just anywhere that there was Radio 1, that there could be that almost like the mnemonic, just like sitting in everything that they do. That's almost like this little audio signature that is Radio 1. And it's such a simple device with the idea, which has then sort of taken root into what has led to this next phase, which was, well, why don't we have the signature, but we will make everything around the song. The station and the song will become sort of synonymous with each other, and that is what we've tried to do here. And you'll hopefully hear, and Matt start to show you how that blend and that synergy sort of just happens. And we've deliberately taken that step that we really try and make the two so intertwined that the music is Radio 1 and Radio 1 is the music. Yeah, so see what you're thinking. As Matt said, this does feature the guy phoning in Greg to request his intros.
From Wisebuddah.
Ali's got something. Ali, good morning.
Bit of a strange one, really. I don't really know why it struck me so much. I was thinking, whoever created it, it's a bit of a masterpiece, really. Would you call it a power hook or something like that, do you? When, like, between the song, it will say something along the lines of BBC.
One.
Radio 1. My body is looking to grow.
Even better than I remember them being on television.
One. BBC.
Radio
1.
Don't you know I'm walking away? Now I'm in my own space. Baby, you know I'm waiting for you.
BBC Radio
1.
Nothing to discuss, cause I did win by
BBC
Radio 1. You better run and hide, baby. I know where you were last night.
The Sam Fender one's really good on this one.
BBC
Radio 1. Radio 1.
I remember sickness was forever.
He wanted me to play one of our power intros, right? Turns out I didn't realise this. People are obsessed with singing along to them. BBC
Radio 1.
BBC
Radio 1. BBC Radio
1.
Making life until I make it. I know my time is coming, baby.
I do quite like that one.
BBC Radio
1. Gravity's holding me back.
Yeah, it's brilliant, that one.
Wisebuddah. Create with us.
So Matt, I'll let you take it away, because they're your babies, essentially.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, isn't it? It's a lot of audio and a lot of probably the most jingles you've ever heard back to back. But yeah, it's those are what we call branded song intros. You hear them every day, all day on Radio 1, and essentially we're going to pick apart some of the sonic source behind these intros, how we do them, why we do what. But before we do that, I guess we could also talk about how this all came to become, and how Radio 1, why did they come to us? What do we know? And also just how did this project come about? What were they looking for? And why this sound? Why not another sound? So as we were talking about before, everything there reflects what was going on in the charts. And as James said before, essentially our job is to imprint the station identity so much into those tracks that you think of Radio 1 whenever you hear that track. So that's the aim behind it. But I actually played quite a big role in this rebrand of Radio 1. To give you some context, the last time Radio 1 had a rebrand, had a jingle rebrand, was probably close to over 10 years ago, which gives you an idea of how big of a project this is and how big of a deal it was, which was why it was such a privilege to be a part of it. But essentially, yeah, they came to us with and they wanted a refined sonic one, so that one that you hear throughout all the branded song intros, that same thing, that same characteristic we were talking about before, that's what imprints Radio 1 into the music. And that sonic one is in every different key that all of the tracks are in. That's how it sits so seamlessly in where it goes, and it imprints so seamlessly into the tracks, is because it's in the same musical key. So what we do is actually very musical. But why did we do it that way? So I'm actually a big part of this creative process. So believe it or not, the voiceover who says one is actually Edie from our office here at Wisebuddah. She's now a producer, and actually goes on to produce some of these intros now, which is amazing. Talk about full circle. But essentially, we auditioned so many voices, and Radio 1 came to us and they said, we want to redo this sonic because it's had such success over the past few years. We want to redo this sonic, but with new voices. We want it to be diverse, vibrant, fun, just sound big, sound like nothing else on the radio. And that's how the Sonic 1 was born. So Edie from our office and my friend Aaron from sixth form, who is actually in a band called The Waterfalls, believe it or not. But that's how I knew him, and I sent these demos off, and yeah, the BBC absolutely loved it, and that's how this came to be about. A lot of the singing, I can see a lot of really lovely comments in the chat, so thanks for those. A lot of the singing and the vocals that you hear in there, aside from Aaron and Edie, are actually session singers. So a lot of it, where we can, we'll rip the artist audio off, the acapellas from the tracks. So if there's a moment where the singer sings one or BBC, which is quite unlikely, we'll put that into the intro, and then that just really helps imprint it. But a fun fact, actually, a lot of the audio, aside from the spoken audio, aside from Aaron and Edie, is actually from session singers who we've recorded. And I'll delve into that a little bit later on when I'm doing an example. But essentially, sorry to break it to you, everyone, but that isn't the artist that's singing Radio 1. It's not your favourite artist. It's actually some session singers who we've put our sonic treatment on to sound like the artists. And I'll reveal a little bit more about that later on, and the process behind that, and why we do that, and how to pick takes. But yeah, that's essentially, I hope that clears everything up on as to how we've done everything.
Yeah. So Matt, before we get into the technical thing, I think that there's sort of lessons that for everybody as well, that even at that point, it's that range of a good audio idea and the ability to let something bed in as well with the creative choices. It's a real clarity of idea, and that thing of trying lots of, to your point, where we tried lots of different voices. Unfortunately, I didn't make the cut from my audition. It's shocking, really. But it is just take a microphone, try different people, try things, layer different things. Just try. It is, isn't it? It's a lot of trial and error of just, this is a bit of an audio idea. Should we give it a go? You never know until you record things, ultimately. And I think that with Radio 1s as well, it's that thing of, I think they want us to take risks with it and to push it. So it's a lot of fun to be able to put those ideas and sort of interpret, but what is a really clear sort of like, we need this as the identity and everything else to grow off it. And ultimately, I think that's the intros are a lot richer for it. So shall I, Matt, stop my share so you can bring up the session and start to and start to debunk the myths.
So I'm going to load up Pro Tools. You can essentially, if you're trying to replicate what I'm doing today, you can do this in any DAW. So I know a lot of you, especially the fellows, are very experienced with a lot of these. There is no difference between all of them, it has to be said. But I just use Pro Tools because that's what I've always used. And yeah, essentially I'm going to load up what we have here, which is a Pro Tools window. And this is where I might start skipping over a lot of jargon that will just come out of my mouth. So if there's something that I've said that doesn't make sense, please do put it in the comments and we'll address it at the end of the session in the Q&A. I can see a lot already kind of flowing in. But what we're going to do essentially for the time being is we're going to pick apart this, which is one of our song intros, power intro, it says at the top. I'm sorry, I know it's confusing. There's so much jargon. But that's just the way it is. And we're going to pick apart one of these branded intros that we did for BBC Radio 1. I thought it was fitting because we've just heard the audio from BBC Radio 1, and it's also such a massive station here, and it's such a big thing that we do, that gets international recognition for being some of the best work in the world. So yeah, essentially I'm going to pick apart this track that we got sent in a few weeks ago. This is a track by Jason Derulo, Jax Jones and Joel Corey. It's called Tonight. A lot of you might have already heard it. I'm going to play it just as I would the first time I would hear something. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick apart my process as to how I've made this. I did make this a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to do a build through sequentially so you can see how I build it, but I'm going to go back, deconstruct how I've done it, why I've done what I've done. So the first thing that I would start by doing when I'm starting to build these sort of branded sonic identities is I would listen to the track and I'd pick apart what I like from the track and what I want to keep, and maybe what I want to not get rid of, but what I want to boost, what I want to put Radio 1 over, and also what kind of vocal takes I might be picking. So I'm going to play it just now.
Girl, I just died in your arms tonight. Didn't even try to escape. I just died in your arms tonight.
So it sounds to me like another record from a few years ago, but that's fine. That's how the music industry works nowadays. I get it. So it starts pretty slow and then builds into this chorus.
Girl, I just died in your arms tonight. I didn't even try to escape. I just died in your arms tonight. I knew I should have walked away.
Okay, so there's quite a lot going on in that track, but essentially the main thing that a lot of you will have picked up on, especially those that are sort of into music production, is that it's sort of a 4 on the floor, almost like trancey 130. I mean, it's 131. They've got to be difficult, haven't they? But it's almost like a trancey house pop song that it's got real high energy about it, and you've got those sort of pianos layered and very side chained, and it's side chained to the kick. So essentially, in this track, the kick and the bass are the two main instruments. So I'll just play it again for you. So ain't no way I'm getting rid of that kick and that bass, because that is the foundation of this track. That's what makes this track, and that's what we need to really let pump in this intro. Okay, so it'd be similar to how if I was making an actual proper jingle for this. I mean, there's a lot of jargon. Again, I'm throwing around, but I would want to keep that bass and that kick at the forefront of whatever I do. So I'm essentially making a branded song intro, not making a jingle. So yeah, I'll just crack on with showing you how I've done this, and if there's anything I glaze over, please let me know and remind me. So to start off with, I would probably start with the music when I'm building these. I use a software called Moises. We have a subscription for a software called Moises. A lot of you might have heard of it already, but this is definitely one to write down if you haven't heard of it already. Thanks to the advancements in AI, we're actually now able to drag in any record that we like, and we will get it separated into stems for us. So by having so we get sent acapellas and instrumentals from the record labels, which we put into Moises, and then we can then pick apart the stems. So I've actually put the stems on different tracks. So this stem here is for the drums. And then this one here is for the bass. And this one here is for that lead. So it just gives me total control over what I'm doing. But essentially, sorry, I'm just going to try and keep it so you can all hear me all the time. Essentially, what that does is gives me really good control. There are plenty of alternatives to Moises, as I mentioned earlier. There's one called, I think, laylals.ai, and essentially it lets you pick apart vocals and instrumentals and even instruments. And there are lots of, as I say, lots of good options. They're actually free or sort of you can get limited trials on that allow you to do this kind of thing, and it's really helpful. I mean, if you drag your favorite pop song in there now, you can see how your favorite pop song was made and sort of start to recreate that by using some of the sounds that are used in that. So it just allows me a lot more flexibility when I'm producing my stuff. And when I got this track, when I got these stems, we get the instrumental sent from the label. I think that was a question somebody had. But all the records that we have and all the instrumentals come straight from the label. So I'm going to mute the voiceover and I'm going to mute the sound effects. I'll come to what I just done there a little bit later on. But this is how I received it when I dragged these stems in. So it didn't have that one in it. It did not have that one in it. Sorry, I missed that one. But essentially, it's quite it's not dull by any means. It's very high energy. But I wanted to create a bit more movement out of it. So what I've done is I've added in a few little bits here and there, just to make a moment where the listener's going to go, "Whoa, what's going on here?" So I'll play it for you now with my added moment, and then I'll talk over what I've done.
Girl, I just died in your...
I realised I had that sort of... Sorry, let me play it again. So what I've done is I've borrowed parts from this to make this into something that now tells a bit of a story, because I don't want this chorus to go into this. It's beautiful intro that Jason Derulo's singing on. I don't want it to kind of go hard and straight away out of nowhere. We're cutting to this nice space, airy synth pad. I want to make the transition a little bit smoother.
I just died in your arms.
So I get rid of the kick, go for the hats only, and I'm using this free space solo track that I've gained from the separation of the stems. Now I'm going to add the sound effects. Before I show you the sound effects, I've also added this drum fill here, which is from Kashmir, which is from a pack on Splice. So the website called Splice. A lot of you, I'm sure, use this on a daily, but we love it here, and it is incredible. It's essentially the biggest library, I think, of sort of sound design and drums and drum samples. A lot of the time, you'll actually find a lot of the records use Splice samples as well, so that's a fun thing. But yeah, I've just added this. It's nothing special, but to me it added a whole lot of difference when I've sort of added it into the mix. Cool. I'm now going to talk about the sound effects. I have everything on buses, by the way. I know I said I'd talk about this a bit later on, but essentially it just lets me keep track of it. So if I want to add something or take it away, I can just mute it on here.
So Matt, with your Radio 1 intros, on these builds, do you sort of set yourself some targets in terms of how many seconds you're looking to sort of maximum put these interesting builds into, or are you dictated a little bit more by the song or like the space that you have at the start before the vocals kick in? What are you what are the rules that you're setting yourself on these intros really?
It's a combination of all of those things. So we've got to remember, radios are if we're talking specifically about what we do with these song intros, they're not the main event. Okay, the song is the main event here, so we can't take away from the song. So we need to sort of, without them being too quick, we need to have them at a reasonable pace. I mean, if you look at this one here, in terms of duration, we're talking 7 seconds before the vocal starts to come in, which is pretty reasonable, and it's enough for people not to switch off. That's the main part, and it's also enough for people to recognize the song. As soon as they hear it, they know that's the song that's coming. They know that Radio 1's playing the song, because as we'll sort of introduce some of the vocals later on, but all of those things dictate how long this is, and also the content we've got to fit into this as well. So Radio 1 has that sonic signature sound that we produce for them, which is the Sonic 1, and that needs to have its own space, because essentially it's the main part of the brand. The Sonic 1, when you listen to the Radio 1 intros, is always massive, it's really loud. So yeah, that needs its own space. That can't be over the busy part here, that has to be over the quiet part of the track here. But also when the vocals come in as well. So the vocals actually come in before the first beat on this specific track, as you can see here.
So is it you're sort of then creating a pocket, right, for that Radio 1 Sonic to live in?
Definitely.
So it's like the entree before the main, but you're sort of making the noise before it. It's and when do you know where that pocket's right? Is it just based on the beat, or just feel? It's
a mixture of two again. It's a lot of the time it's just how does it feel, to be honest. That I think that's the main thing. But obviously, yeah, like I said, it can't be at the start of the intro if it's too busy. And in this track, for instance, we've got this sort of, there's a lot going on there, right? There's a lot of sort of polyphonic synths. And then there's also that synth lead as well that you can hear. So the Radio 1 Sonic would be too busy over that, which is why I created this moment, because it really brings Radio 1 to the forefront of the intro. And the listener ultimately knows they're listening to Radio 1. I mean, if they didn't already. But yeah. Does that all make sense? Brilliant. Cool. I'm going to add some sound design now. Yeah, like I say, any other questions as well, feel free to put them in the comments, and we'll come to them later on. So, I mean, I'm not the best example to use here, because my Pro Tools sessions have got quite a bit going on, and as you can see, I tend to sort of put one thing on each track so I can sort of manipulate the sounds as I want to. But let's start with the sound design and essentially what I've done here. So I'm going to play it now with the sound design.
Girl, I just died in your arms.
Just, as you can see, it just gives it a kick, really, doesn't it? Like, everything is sort of amplified with what I've done here. So it's time to bring out the jargon again. Are you ready? Here comes breaker. So a breaker is essentially like a sort of like a stuttered hit, and there's a few of them going on here, sort of. So again, this comes back to what James was talking about earlier with layering sounds. Like, it's what we do all the time to achieve these sort of unique sounds, and it's applicable to all sorts of parts of the audio world. You know, if you're telling a story, if there's a vocal, I mean, we'll come to that vocal layering a little bit later on, but sort of, I mean, that's the breaker that you've got going on there, and I've got a wipe to sort of carrying it in nicely. So that just sort of gives it like a level of punch, really, and prepares the listener for what's about to happen. But all this is just layers worth of sound design, and you can find things like this on Splice. These FX that I've used here are sort of exclusive to Wisebuddah, and you'll notice a lot of these across a lot of our packages.
You're like we make a lot of sound design as well. So for everybody here, what would you say, like, as a beginner's guide to sound design, if somebody was going to try, and like, where would you start with?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Sound design.
Splice, I would say, is such an amazing resource, and there are lots of radio jargon things here, but the main things that you need to know about are risers, impacts, wipes, and I mean, like, sort of sweeps, I think, because they're relatively applicable to everything. But these sound design jargon terms, you hear them in everything. Okay, they're in absolutely every piece of audio that we create, for certain. But when you listen to your favorite song, for example, when you listen to your favorite record, you might sometimes hear like a whoosh, and that essentially is a riser. And they're so useful for both storytelling. So if there's a moment that you want to enhance in a story, you can use a riser to really quickly rise up, and then have a gap, and then have a which is an impact. So essentially they can be used for a lot of storytelling, and we use them no differently. It's essentially all it is storytelling. And when I pick apart some of the sound design earlier, you'll see why I put it in the places I put it. Like, for instance, here you can see a big riser called Giant, and then that goes into this Sonic, Radio 1 Sonic. But yeah, for starting in sound design, to come back to what you're saying, Splice samples are a really good way to start, and then also maybe thinking about how those samples have been created. So the way in which samples are created is literally through synthesis, right? Sometimes it's through recording stuff and getting a handheld microphone and figuring out a sound and then putting layers to it. But a lot of the time it's through synthesis now. And there are countless synths that I can sort of name, but on Logic Pro there's the ES2, which is really good. I would probably recommend, the one that I tell everyone to go to, is a synth called Serum. It is a paid synthesizer, but it has so many parameters and it's so easy to use. And you can go on YouTube and just type in whatever you want to make on Serum. So if you want to make a riser, a wipe, or an impact, you can do all of those things. But yeah, that's the sound design that we use on this. And some of the jargon will just come out, so you'll have to forgive me.
Girl, I just died in your arms.
So that is the intro with the sound design. I'm going to pick apart a few of the little bits. So this intro hit here, I'll probably start with the Sonic first. So this is the Radio 1 Sonic, and this is our secret Sonic source that we add to each of the Radio 1 intros. And I mean, I don't know how familiar you'll all be with that sound. Hopefully, very familiar. But that lives on all of the intros on Radio 1 and a lot of the production on Radio 1. And that's what we were talking about earlier. So this track is in G sharp and it's at 131. So I've used grid mode, which you can access on all DAWs, and I've used grid mode to sonically stamp the Radio 1 Sonic on grid. So that it's in time with the song. I should have also specified that with the stems as well, but the stems are essentially on grid. So as you can see, these beats here, if I fall it to within the line, the kick starts on this line, and the track starts on this line as well. So that is the Radio 1 Sonic. Coming back to the breaker. So the breaker hits, and then there's a nice wipe to take people into the impact, because if I get rid of the wipe, I mean, it'll probably still sound alright, but it just doesn't prepare you for it enough, so that's better, right? And then I've got this nice This is probably just somebody saying and it's just with a lot of sound design behind here, right? There's nothing too special about this, but there's a lot of reverb on this. And I got this sample again from Splice. I also got this sample from Splice. So what essentially I'm doing here is I'm looking for sounds that are going to suit the piece of music that I'm working on, which is the Jason Derulo Joel Corey track. So I've picked this drop that's in G, but I've actually pitched it up. You can see I've pitched it up one semitone because the track's in G sharp. But this crash here, it's very, very sort of EDM-y, very symptomatic of a lot of EDM and house music, and it fits very nicely with this track. The breakers, that's a lot of experimentation with regards to how I've actually picked that. It's just all experimentation. And a kick as well underneath the breaker makes it just sort of, again, coming back to layering, it makes it sound a lot fuller, a lot more full. It fills out the frequency spectrum, so maybe that's something that we should talk about a little bit later on. But yeah, I'm not showing any audio now, but yeah, essentially our aim is to fill that up. I can't actually get rid of this.
Is it the red on the right?
I think I've done it. So yeah, I hope that makes sense to everyone. And yeah, we've sort of got a riser. As I said, risers with this specific one is to emphasize the sonic. There's no real secret behind it. It's just rising into a sonic. So I mean, you can see it rises into this first beat of the bar here, which is where the 1 falls. And it makes it sound massive. Here's with. There's a lot of work in helping that 1 sound massive. And then I'll pick apart some other sound design here as well. So obviously we have that drum fill and this sort of filtering going on. So I've got an EQ on here, which is doing what's called a bandpass filter. A lot of you might have used these before. There's loads of EQs out there, but this is the best one. It's not a paid placement, but I wish it was. But if you're on Logic Pro, there's a free version of this. I think either called bandpass or just EQ. And a bandpass essentially is how you get that telephone sounding effect. So it's essentially removing all the low frequencies below 200 and then removing all the high frequencies above 5k, and that's how you get that telephone effect. But in tandem with that, when it comes back to sound design, because I've filtered off a lot of the low end of the track and there's no bass going on, I've cut the bass out here, as you can see. I needed something to compensate for that, so I've actually gone for a sub drop. And I think only those of us on the call that are wearing headphones or have speakers will be able to hear that. But it's actually, I mean, if I turn it up, headphone users warning. Yeah, essentially that's from Splice as well, and it's from a pack called Kashmir, and it's a sub drop, and that's a type of impact, and you hear them in movies all the time. Last time you went to the cinema or last time you watched a movie trailer, you would have heard one of these tucked away somewhere, or even really loudly. But essentially what that is just a sine wave that's just sort of pitching up, and it allows us to sort of, where I'm taking away a lot of those low frequencies, it allows me to add them back in. And you can see here on this graphic that this occupies a lot of this low range of the sort of EQ spectrum here. And then I've got a few other risers. I've used the same riser. It's a bit lazy of me there, but I mean, it sounds good, so who really cares? And there's a few other bits going on here as well. So these impacts, for instance, that just sort of add a lot of sort of power to the start of the track. So when I play it,
Girl, I just died in your arms.
downlifter. These are all available on Splice, by the way, all these sounds. A couple of them are sort of Wisebuddah sounds, but the vast majority of what I'm using here is honestly available everywhere, and you can also make a lot of these yourself. Just quickly, I'll show you how to do that. If you generate some white noise, there'll be generate here somewhere. Signal generator, white noise. And then if you get sort of like a filter that's gonna sort of filter up. So this is essentially an EQ, this filter that I've just put on. And that's how to make a riser in 10 seconds, right? So it's just it's a supplementary piece of production. So now for the vocal production, which I'm sure is what everyone's most interested in, and I'm going to play it with the vocals on now.
BBC Radio 1. Girl, I just died in your arms tonight.
Cool. So let's unpick this. So as I was talking about earlier, Edie, our incredibly talented voiceover artist, has recorded her saying BBC many times. She's probably sick of hearing the words BBC. She said it so much, and one as well. That's another good one. But essentially, she's recorded herself here saying BBC, BBC, BBC. We picked the best takes of what she's saying, and we have put it into a vocal track. I've coloured these blue just because nice to be organised sometimes. And I've dragged it into a mono track here on my Pro Tools session, and I've put a bit of tuning on it. This is a tuner called Waves Tune Lite. I'm sure a lot of you guys have this, to be honest. This is in all of the Waves bundles, but if you don't, there are a lot of stock plugins that are really good that come with a lot of your DAWs. So there's, I think, one called Pitch Correct on Logic, and it can just allow you to get really creative effects. So if you're doing music, if you're doing podcasting, if you want just to create something a little bit cool and a little bit weird, you can sort of use this to shape your production. So I've tuned it to G sharp minor because that's the key that I'm working in, and let's hear what it sounds like.
BBC.
Right, okay, so there's quite a bit going on, but essentially, as you can see, the first B is falling on beat. So it didn't sound like this before. She doesn't speak rhythmically, right? As great as she is, she can't go BBC. So essentially, what I've done here is I've taken this first B and I've put it on beat.
BBC.
But I've actually done it a bit neater than that. So I'll go back to the way I done it.
BBC.
And the C falls on beat as well. So it's almost like, it almost sounds like she's singing it. It almost sounds like she's going BBC. Not saying it like that because that doesn't sound very natural. But if I take off the tuning,
BBC.
you can see it's not as tuned. It just really helps to glue it to the notes.
BBC.
If I chose another key, it would sound a bit odd. I'll demonstrate that. So if I just sort of play around with it for some sort of sonic artifacts,
BBC.
like you can get all sorts of weird effects by playing around with this. And the speed and the note transition, this refers to how much actual pitch correction I'm doing. And with her voice, I wanted to do quite a lot because I wanted it to sound semi-robotic but semi-natural at the same time. And that's what I came up with. Again, it's all trial and error. The next thing on my vocal channel is some compression. This is a really easy thing to use called CLA vocals. This is not what I would usually use, but I'm using this because I think it's a really good plugin to show everyone, because this is in the Waves bundle, and essentially this is the best thing to happen to the music industry for a very long time, in terms of its ease of use. It is so easy to use. So you can essentially dial in some effects that you want. So I've compressed it quite a lot, and the compression that I've used is called Spank. And it's doing quite a lot to this voice. It's compressing it quite a lot. There's sort of wall, push as well. These are sort of adjectives to describe how aggressive you want the compression to be. I want it to be quite aggressive. There's this dial here called treble. How much treble do I want? Again, it's all about trial and error. I can do some really cool effects to this within this one plugin, which is why I've used it today, because it's so good. Right, if I want a slap delay, I can turn this on.
BBC.
Without.
BBC.
If I want some sort of stereo width.
BBC.
That sounds very different. But yeah, there's all sorts of things you can do with that plugin. It's really good. Its main use for my template today that I'm showing you is compression. Then I've got a noise gate. Just taking off some of the noise in Edie's recording. I've then got this EQ, which is
BBC.
It's the Fab Filter Pro Q3, which I've been talking about quite a lot during the session. But essentially, I'm removing a lot of the low end. So back to what I was talking about before with frequencies. It's really important that frequencies aren't poking out where you don't want them. And in vocals, a lot. I mean, this is especially applicable to a lot of the fellows on the call, who are podcasting or pitching podcasts or vocal recording. You don't need a lot of this low end information here, because there's nothing here that's going to be beneficial to your vocal, because the human voice doesn't sort of speak under 50 hertz. I mean, if you did, it would be very impressive. But essentially, I'm removing this all from Edie's vocal because we don't need it. That's what it sounds like. It's not exactly what you want in your vocal. I'm then removing a bit of body because I didn't like this frequency. I mean, you can hear the rumble there in that vocal. Sorry if the delay's a bit jarring, everyone, but I hope it's not. And then I'm cutting a bit of EQ here. I mean, that's a horrible frequency, right? We don't want that. And because we're compressing this audio, we're bringing up those imperfections, so we've also got to take them down again. On top of that, I've got a free plugin called Talpa. This is brilliant. This is such a steal. It's free, and it's essentially modelled on a Juno chorus. I'll dial in the effect to show you what it does.
BBC.
So essentially, it gives it a lot of stereo width, but also a nice effect. And then I've got this Echo Boy, which is a delay by Sound Toys. And I've also got this Valhalla Vintage Verb. This is just a reverb. You can use any reverb. I'm cutting out a bit of the low-end information, as you can see here on the EQ, because like I said earlier, the human voice doesn't want any of that low end. Another trick that I've done is there's actually a reverse reverb here. So it sounds like almost like Edie's sort of coming into the room. Essentially how I've done that is I've committed the audio, or just put the audio onto another track, and then I've gone to the reverb of choice, which for me would be Valhalla Vintage Verb, and I just hit the turn. Don't forget the low cut, don't want any of that low end vocal information. I'm just going to reverse it, and it's the same with any other DAW. You might not have a reverse button on your plugins, but it helps you get this effect that essentially sounds like this. BBC. So yeah, that can be really helpful for a lot of podcasting, a lot of audio editing. That's a really useful thing. All that noise is essentially a reverb that's reversed. That's how you have that rise. I've added a few other things to it as well, like a filter, a bit of panning just to give it a bit of stereo width. And then to close off, I'll show you the final two vocals, which are, there's a sung radio, which you would have heard, which is this. Radio. And you know, I was talking to you about how the singers aren't actually the singers in the tracks. This isn't Jason Derulo. This is actually a guy called Luke, who is a really good singer, and he's sung like this. Radio.
Radio.
I've sort of manipulated his voice a bit.
Radio.
There's tuning. There's compression. There's quite a lot of compression there. There is some more. So I was notching out a lot of nasty frequencies here with an EQ, just to remove the frequencies that I didn't like. I've used a delay. I've also used a vocal bender, which is a plugin from Waves. This is actually really good. Essentially, this is formant shifting. So I'm using there's two parameters here. One called pitch, one called formant. I'm turning the formant down to
radio.
So it sort of rises up, and that's how you get that weird effect. It sort of sounds like radio. So that's how I've done that. And then I've put a reverb on it. And then for the final vocal, I've got Jason Derulo singing One. Now these are a menace to make, and these have taken me so much time over the past few years in making these intros. But essentially what we do is when we get the acapellas from the labels, we'll go and listen to the whole acapella, and we'll try and find bits where we can construct Jax Jones or Jason Derulo singing the word one. And what a lot of what that involves is picking apart what actually makes up the word radio, for example, or one. So for radio, there's a Ray, there's a D, and there's an O. So if there's a bit where Jason Derulo says Ray, I'll hear that and I'll think I'm having that. So I'll put that Ray, and then if he says D O or something like that, I'll just piece these together, right? In this particular one, there was nothing like that, which is why I've used Luke, who's our session singer, as I was talking about earlier. But I've actually crafted Jason Derulo singing. And he didn't actually sing that. He's never sung that. But I've taken a W from. Let's find out, shall we? So I've taken a W from walked away. I've taken an R from walked away again. And then this on from. I mean, that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. And then the nut is just from another vocal take that I found on Splice. And then onto that, I've just added some delay and some reverb to really help it. Just really helps it sit nicely in the context of the intro. That is everything. There is a little bit of filtering going on that you might have noticed there with that one. I'm going to have to bypass the reverb because otherwise it's going to keep on playing because it's a really long reverb. But the filtering I'm doing is with a plugin called Air Lo-Fi, which comes free with Pro Tools. You can do this with any plugin, but essentially I'm manipulating the sample rate here so it sounds like it's almost crushing the audio, right? Let me play it again with the reverb.
Girl, I just died in your arms tonight.
And that is everything. And then I'm doing a bit of light mastering, sending it into a limiter, making sure everything's at 0 decibels. But that is how we craft these intros. That's why we do what we do. I hope everything that I've said makes sense, but it doesn't, feel free to pull me up on it, and I'll try and explain anything a bit further. I also hope it's been of value to you, and if there's anything that I haven't spoken about that you would like to get something from, as in if you'd like to know specifically how I've done something within this, feel free to ask. So for example, if you're putting together a podcast and you'd like to know a bit more about vocal chains, feel free to ask that as well. But for now, I think it's time that I stop and hand it back to some questions.
Well, we've got about 15 minutes, so yeah, that was fantastic. I have so many questions. I'm sure you do as well, but I'm going to mention one because it feels like we've just been talking about this again just towards the end there.
Sure.
Which was put in the chat earlier, which was what's the IP side of ripping vocal or even sound in general? So, do you ever have Jason Derulo knocking on your door saying, "Oh, yeah, I never said that. So, what are you doing?"
No, that's a really good question. Like I said, the clients send us the records. So Radio 1 gets their music from the labels. We get the music directly from the labels. a lot of the time that means we get to listen to the new music first as well, which is a privilege in itself. But all of our acapellas instrumentals come straight from the labels. We're not going onto any dodgy websites and ripping stuff off.
Yeah, it's almost because they are designed for play out where the artist will benefit. It's that they mutually want that song intro to sound as good as possible. So in terms of like fair use production, it's fairly fine for broadcasting purposes. If you're trying to monetize off it, it might be a different. If you yourself were trying to monetize off it for like a royalty credit or pretending it was you, then obviously that would be a different world of pain. But the fact that in terms of reporting, it all goes back to that label and the artist anyway. It's just a self-fulfilling wheel for them.
Feel free to put a hand up or put your camera on if you want to ask a question, or put it in the chat. I'm just going to ask one more whilst people put their hands up, which was what was the thing I was going to ask? Oh yes, it was about at one stage, Matt, you said something like you talked about you after all this, the listener will know, if they didn't know already, hopefully, that they're listening to Radio 1. And I think just a little bit of background and maybe sort of almost historical context as to why is it important that the listener knows they're listening to the station that they're listening to. I'm thinking about a thing called Radar in the UK that I mean, I don't know if either of you want to talk about that. Is that kind of where this stems from? That it's important that people remember what station they were listening to if they're ever asked in a survey, what station do you listen to? I'm assuming that's where it comes back to. Do either of you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I could take on the fundamentals of it. It sort of predates back even before Radar, with just the identity of, if you think about when it was long wave and the dial tone of old like transistor radio, you would need that audio recollection of what you were doing, because people used to, when the wireless was invented, it was a dial tone. So it started with frequency and name of station. So you would turn to frequency, and then but you would have then the bridge of the audio being the station name. So you would link the two. So where it was about on the dial, you'd be doing, and then you think you'd find it in the right area, and then you get the audio like confirmation of that's what you were listening to. So it even predates all of that, and it's sort of tradition is just built and built and built, and then I think fundamental, and then as you say, like especially in this country, like Radar came along, and I don't think it harmed the people having that recall for when they were filling in the book, to be honest.
Yeah, cool. Daniel, you've got your hand up. I think you're first in the queue. We'll come to Donald in just a sec as well. But Daniel, hello.
Hey guys, thanks very much for this. This has been brilliant. This is my crack right here. You know, I could just get more and more of this. So I just got a couple questions I want to ask, because I was going to ask what you have on the master, just because there's so many elements there that I assumed you need something to sort of glue all of that together. So I was surprised it was only the limiter. So I was going to ask, have you got lots of volume automation happening in all of those tracks?
No,
and then it's just
no, that's not. So I'm not gonna give too much away here, because a lot of it's sort of a signature sound of mine. But essentially, I'll give you some ways of achieving the sound that I've achieved here. So before I send it into the master, I'm actually sending it to what's known as a submaster, and this allows me. So when I have everything hitting my limiter, I want it to be below 0, and I don't want anything to go above 0 dB, because then you get clipping, right? So before that, I have a submaster, and then just as a very final gate to stop anything going over 0 dB, I'll either have something that's doing just a bit of controlled clipping, or a limiter. What I've got here is on my submaster is I've got the MC404, which is by a company called Moog DSP. And they make incredible sort of multi-band compression plugins, but there's actually a really good alternative. I'm I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of this or maybe even used it, but it's called OTT. That does a fraction of the MC404 does, essentially what the MC404 is doing is it's doing the job of both OTT and an SSL compressor. So if I pick up an SSL, I'm sure this is ringing bells for so many people, but this is I don't actually have this one because I don't use this, but this is one of the world's most famous compressors by solid state logic, and this is a really good compressor, and you can get some really good sounds by just flicking through these and seeing what you like. But there's one here called like Mixbus, for example, that I've just found. So what essentially I'm doing in my master is I'm using a combination of this and OTT. I'm then using a plugin called Oxford Inflator, which I'm sure you've heard of as well. This is really quite popular at the moment, but this is a harmonic exciter. So what this is doing is it's pushing the level up without affecting any of those sort of frequencies that you get from using distortion. So this is essentially a distortion, but a distortion that adds in the nice sounds, not the nasty ones. I've then got an analyzer just to check where my mix sits next to the track. So what I'll do is I'll play a part of my intro and I'll see what levels I'm hitting and where, and I'll match that to the track, because I obviously don't want an intro that's way bassier than the track. And then I'll go back into my master chain and I'll maybe take some of the low end out or take some of the high end out. But I mean, a lot of radio is very toppy, right? And a lot of how you get this sound is by pushing the top end. A lot of that doesn't actually come from the master chain itself. It actually comes from the vocal chain. So the master chain is just sort of see it as a glue, right? And a sort of rough glue. So you've got the MC404, which is like OTT and SSL. You've got the Oxford Inflator, which is just sort of pushing the high end a bit. You've got an out limiter, which is like just doing a tiny bit of pushing that threshold up to the out ceiling. And then I've got a plugin called Soothe, which is essentially soothing the mix of any frequencies that are a bit nasty. So I'm taking away these frequencies here, taking away these and these. That's a really good plugin as well. On my vocal chain, this is where the magic happens really. I've got another MC404, which is the same as OTT again. I've got this exciter, which is pushing the top end, because a lot of these pop songs have really high end vocals, so I'm pushing that high end as much as I can here, right? I've then got a compressor, which I'm just sort of gluing together. I've got a flanger on at 1%. This is sort of a little bit of a signature secret thing, but it just lives on my mix and I don't change it. I'm adding a bit of bass in, because just remember, I'm taking a lot of bass away from my vocals in my vocal chains up here. I'm removing a lot of the stuff I don't want, and then I'm adding back the stuff in that I do want. So I'm taking away the nasty high end, reintroducing the nice high end, the artificial high end here, taking away the nasty bass, reintroducing the nice bass here. And then I've also got this plugin here called Maserati Vocals, and I invented this little preset here, which is essentially pushing the top end of vocals just so you get that pop sound. And then I'm also doing a little bit of light limiting here, but I don't send everything really hard into my limiters. That's another reason why I'm able to do all this gain addition. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, if you're sending it so hard, you've got nothing to play with. Everything that I send is at -10, and that goes to the submaster, and then I can play with it and make it sound the way I want it. I hope that answers the question.
I mean, it does. You shared more than I even thought you would, so thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. I do have
just
one
don't tell anyone.
yeah, hold it down, everybody. Just one other brief question, because it's just, I know that you mentioned synthesis before, but I know that it seemed like throughout this project it was all samples. So I was just wondering, do you draw for like synthesis as almost like a last resort if you can't find a thing, or there's something really specific that you want to create?
Everything that you've heard today, all the samples have been created using synthesis. So this sample here, for instance, is just a sine wave that's going up really high in the sort of really high frequency ranges. Like if I bring up an EQ, you can sort of see here. Can you see that sweep there? You can see it in real time. It sweeps up, and that's very typical of radio. You'll hear that all the time. But these are all samples that we've created by using synthesis to make our lives a bit easier going later on. But when we're composing using composing music, like the pop top 10 stuff and the hit list stuff that you heard earlier. All of that is both samples and synthesis. But we use a range of different stuff, to be totally honest. Like Serum is probably one of the synths that we use the most because it's so versatile. And in terms of being able to use it for everything, when I say there's bass sounds, there's lead sound, but there's so much versatility in that. So yeah, everything you hear, give or take, was created on a synthesizer that's ours, apart from the vocals.
Yeah, got you. Thank you so much, guys.
Oh, cool.
No problems.
Okay. Donald, do you want to? You've got your hand up. Yeah, come on, let's hear you.
Yeah, so I suppose I'd just say I sort of come from sort of the writing and radio script side of things, but I have a background in geophysics and an interest as an audiophile, so I'm probably the least technically competent in the audience. So when you described your examples at the beginning, I found it fascinating. I learned a lot, but you did explain a lot about what you were doing there and what the different elements that you created achieved in the overall feel. And I just wondered, do you have to explain that to your clients very often, or do they get it? Maybe they get it like me, but without the technical language to express what they're hearing.
That's sort of it's one of my main jobs at Wisebuddah, I think, is terms of taking almost like the language of our producers and the understanding of our brief and being sort of like the gateway of knowing what information goes. So I'm a lot more conceptual in terms of the understanding, which you can probably tell was like how I talk about stations and audio compared with Matt's. You say you're probably the least technical in the audience. I don't know. I'd probably rival you for that. I think what Matt does is wizardry. But in terms of how we explain it, it's our job also to sort of explain those technical concepts in a way that a station can understand, and that can be around sort of like genres of music, styles and energies. So it's about finding that terminology that they then put the trust in us to then put that technical production, because they're not in the studio with us as we put these together. So we're not going to send them. We don't send them half-baked ideas as well. So it's about understanding what that brief and that concept is, and then us sort of putting the pieces together. And then we almost, and even in our first like iterations of what we do, we hope would be good enough to air. So that's what we do. So it's about not, if the client is technical though as well, we might bring them on that journey. So it's understanding where the station's at in their technical, which we often get from the brief. Like you get step one, you get a good understanding of where your station's going to be at, I think.
Cool.
That's great. That's really helpful.
Anything you want to follow up with, Donald, while you're here, or you had a few questions in the chat.
Well, I had loads of questions about jargon,
and so on. What is a donut? Did we ever explain what a donut is in the end? Do you want to take that one? I
was going to ask the non-technical zoo that you mentioned at the beginning. It gives it a bit of a zoo or something. You said
yeah, bit of zhuzh. I think, yeah. So a donut within a jingle is one that starts with a sing, ends with a sing in the same structure. So imagine if you had a radio station which was like had the station name sung, and then you'd have loop of music, and then almost like the same sing at the end, because it completes the circle, donut, done.
And that's designed so that they can talk in the middle of it, the presenter potentially, or
it depends.
Sometimes,
it's how it's going to be used in the program, because it could have messaging over it as well. It depends on the length of the music, but the idea is that it will be used as sometimes in place of at the top of the hour, at the top of the clock for something. So yeah, it's essentially just a programming device that they can either sort of have a short thing, either like out of a break that just needs a sing and whatever in the middle, really.
Yeah. As a presenter, it really lifts your energy. One of the things that I do when I'm not doing this is I'm also a TV announcer on BBC One, and I often talk over the end credits of the hit list. I didn't realize that you guys had made that music, and it's a joy to talk over. It really is, compared to so many other programs, because it just kind of gives you energy as a TV presenter announcer. It's just, I don't know, you just kind of feel up, and it's Saturday night, and you're probably saying it's going to be Strictly on next or whatever.
Yeah,
And
I often do wonder in terms of continuity, is that actually, which you've sort of answered there, is that do continuity announcers actually pay attention to any of the musical side, or are you more focused on your scripts and devolved from it?
I don't know if everyone does, but my background is radio and music, so yeah, it's everything to me, and it makes such a difference. So yeah, it's lovely.
Never thought about that before.
Oh, no, it's fab. It's really, really nice to speak over. Does anyone else have a question before we probably should wrap up soon? Hello. Yeah, Aisha.
Sorry, Steve, it's
No.
not a Wisebuddah question, but what other TV shows do you announce on?
Oh God, whatever's on the telly. Anything, depends.
So
You know,
are you mainly BBC
I do
One?
it I do it in Scotland, so you won't hear me there. You won't hear me in Scotland. Yeah, I'm based in Glasgow. So
okay.
yeah, and Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have their own announcers. So
Right,
yeah, but
okay.
it depends. It could be the hit list. It could be Casualty. It could be Songs of Praise.
Cool.
And yeah, it's usually one of those. Oh, Homes Under the Hammer.
Okay. Cool.
Anyway, a small diversion there. Yeah, any sort of last bits or things that either James, Matt, you want to mention, or that you didn't cover already, or if people want to hear more. I mean, it sounds like actually the one question I did have was, are you this sort of recent bit of publicity that's had on Greg James on the Breakfast Show has, I mean, it has sort of, do you want people to know this stuff, or would you rather it stays sort of subliminal? I guess is it nice that this is sort of, you know, cat's out of the bag a bit, and you know, they've sort of revealed a bit of the world of what you guys do, or yeah, how do you feel about that?
Matt, do you want to go first from a producer's point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice. Sorry, my internet might be a little bit dodgy. But no, I think it's not. I think it's really nice, because these, as you can see, they're intricately crafted pieces of production. And you know, I would myself sitting in this boxed room for hours EQing somebody saying the word radio, right? So to hear someone appreciate the finer details, but also just to see the impact that it has on air is also really rewarding as well, because you heard how many intros they played and the response that it gets from just one listener. So just think about the hundreds of thousands of people that are listening to Radio 1 every day, the millions that are tuning in every week. So yeah, I quite like it, but I'm not sure about what James thinks. James, what do you think?
I think in any industry, talent should get its flowers, and so I think that the more people that are talking about it, and the more recognised it is as an art form, I think that is only a good thing. And as I said, I think at the start of it, I see what we do as a niche within the music industry, and I'm really proud of that. So the more people that talk about it, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Cool. Well, I've noticed your work, but on Radio 1 in particular, lots. But I don't think I'll ever hear the station in the same way again now that I see that. I feel like I've not just seen it under the bonnet. I feel like I've been in the bonnet. I feel like I've been under the car, seen the whole lot. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, as a final thing, I will say that since I joined Wisebuddah, I do not listen to music in the same way anymore, which it's like I almost listen to it in STEM form now, or like about things. So it's actually really annoying. It's like
that's kick number 007 from pack 121. That kind of thing.
Oh, well, we're a little bit over time, so we should wrap it up. But it's been such pleasure to witness this and find out so much more about it. I guess people could easily find you if they went to wisebuddah.com.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Or just search Wisebuddah, all one word, on socials as well, and you'll find us. Really a good. But just thank you to everybody as well. I know it's been a long week, a Friday afternoon, and thank you for having us as well, talking our weird and wonderful little corner of the industry.
Privilege. Thank you both so much. That is it for today. Coming up, can't help myself. Coming up, we've got 4 more masterclasses. One in particular, I think if you've enjoyed today's, in a couple of weeks' time, is with Mira Kumar, who herself is a former fellow and is now flying, doing some amazing documentary and sound work, and getting awards for it as well. Mira's fantastic. It's about creating a sonic identity for a story. A lot of parallels, but very different as well. But that's, I think, in 2 weeks' time, Friday the 8th of November. There's a few more. They're on the website. There was a question about whether this recording will be available at some stage. I've definitely recorded it. Where it'll be, I'm not quite sure. Check the Multitrack website, socials. I think they're all going to go there in time, but bear with us. We're a small team. But yes, it will be. It has definitely recorded, I think. So yes. But yeah. Thank you. Okay. Have a wonderful weekend. And thank you again to James and Mark for your time today. And thanks for everyone's questions.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.
It's been lovely to see you all.
Thank you. Have a good weekend. See you. Bye.
Thank you. See you all soon.